Hello everyone, and welcome to what will probably be my last Elden Ring video. Today I want to talk about an issue related to the game's difficulty. The goal will not be to argue that this boss is too easy or that boss is too hard or to restart the debate about difficulty in video games. Can you really call yourself a gamer if you use magic? Might be an interesting question, but that's not today's point. What I actually want to talk about is how, fairly easily, you can end up exploring dungeons or even an entire region in Elden Ring while being so overpowered that the game just stops being challenging altogether. Elden Ring is an open world game, you can explore whatever you want. And that freedom is awesome, it's one of the game's biggest strengths. But just because you're free to go anywhere from the start doesn't mean the developers didn't have a general progression in mind. The game has a difficulty curve. Some areas are easier than others. The thing is, since you're free to explore in whatever order you like, you don't even have to do most of the areas at all, it's really easy to stumble into a dungeon or an area that was clearly meant for the early game when you're not in the early game anymore, and that dungeon or areas does not pose any challenge anymore. And like I said, most of the game's areas are optional, and like in every game with a lot of side content, if you do most of it, you risk ending up way too strong for the main content and bosses will stop giving you any challenge. The game will feel too easy. Or maybe more appropriately, you will feel like your character is too strong. Now, obviously, you can play Elden Ring in the order the devs probably intended and never run into this issue. And also, for some people, being too strong and wiping out a boss into it isn't really a problem. The first time I played Elden Ring, I did Castlemorn after completing Stormveil Castle, and let's say the boss there, the Leonine Misbegotten, didn't stand a chance. I was way too strong. But honestly, I didn't mind. I find kind of fun to just obliterate a boss once in a while. You can end up overpowered and not really mind much. But you might have heard people bring this up as a flaw. Critics like Joseph Anderson or Nikki Jakey have both talked about it. And I'm mentioning them because their Elden Ring videos are among the most watched on YouTube, but they're far from being the only ones who talked about it. And the first thing I want to say is that even though it didn't personally bother me to feel overpowered at some point in Elden Ring, I don't think they're wrong to call it a problem. Boss fights are a huge part of From Software's games. For a lot of players, they are the reason to play. They want to face monsters that feel unbeatable, to discover their moves and learn how to deal with them and finally overcome them. Except that walking into a room and killing the boss in 1 or 2 hits, that's not the best way to enjoy the fight. You don't have the chance to learn the boss's attack and adapt to them. You don't even see the attacks. And, bosses are hard in those games because Hidetaka Miyazaki believes the bigger an obstacle is, the more joy overcoming it will bring. In an interview with Keza MacDonald for The Guardian, when asked about difficulty in gaming and how some game creator may want to add easier mode to cater for more players, Miyazaki said, "If we really wanted the whole world to play the game, we could just crank the difficulty down more and more. But had we taken that approach, I don't think the game would have done what it did. Because the sense of achievement that players gain from overcoming these hurdles is such a fundamental part of the experience. Turning down difficulty would strip the game of that joy, which in my eyes would break the game itself." So yeah, from that perspective, it seems legitimate to me to call being overpowered a problem, because it goes against both players' expectation and developers' intentions. At first glance, this doesn't sound like a super hard problem to fix. Critics have actually suggested some pretty straightforward solutions. For example, the game could have had recommended levels indicators for each area or dungeon. That's something we already see in RPGs, and that would probably not be hard to have. The devs know which areas are meant to be easier or harder, so they could have made that visible to players, something like a little recommended level tag next to a zone, for example. That way, we'd know the intended order and could avoid exploring an harder area before an easier one. Another idea is enemy level scaling, meaning enemies get stronger based on your character's level. If you are low level, so are the enemies, and if you get stronger, they get stronger too. That way you can't really out-level the content, and the game never becomes too easy no matter how much you explore. Both of those ideas sound like decent ways to fix the you out-level the game issue, but only if you take them in a vacuum. Because if you take the developer's intention into account, you realize you're dealing with what Alex Jaffe called a cursed problem. A problem that may have solutions, but those are going to be cursed solutions. Solutions that can fix a problem, but at the cost of causing other problems in other aspects of the game. For Miyazaki, the most important thing about Elden Ring was adventure. In an interview with Matt Kim for IGN, he said that, for Elden Ring, there needed to be another thing, adventure. A feeling of exploration that was the top priority, above everything else. He then explains, we need this breath of freedom, this high degree of freedom in how you approach this adventure. And in order to have adventure, in order to have discoveries, again, you need to have some unknowns. And for it to be a discovery, it needs to feel like it's an unknown, feel like it's there to be discovered. That's Miyazaki's intent. He wants unknowns in this game to help create a feeling of adventure. And that goes against putting recommended levels on each areas or dungeons in the game, because that would have influenced players' exploration and reduced that feeling of adventure. A similar issue comes up with the level scaling. For me, the bosses in Elden Ring fall into two categories. Bosses that feel impossible to defeat, and bosses that feel like it's doable. As an example of an impossible boss, you have the very first boss that killed 99% of players, or the Golden Knight patrolling Limgrave, or Margit. Those are bosses that feel impossible to defeat the first time you fight them. But next to them you have the boss at the end of the tutorial, or that one hiding in a cave we find just after the dude in golden armor. Bosses that may not feel easy, but between the damage they deal and the health they have, you feel like you will manage to beat them if you try a few times. What's brilliant is that the game gives you boss type early on, and for the impossible ones, the game invites you to not fight them. For the first one, the game just continues after it kills you. You can walk past the second one, and after dying to Margit, Melina shows up and invites you to the Roundtable Hold, where you find lots of NPC with quests inviting you to explore. The lesson the devs want to teach here is, I think, if you find a boss that seems too hard, you don't have to bash your head against him. You can explore, get stronger, and make that boss go from the impossible category to the I think I can beat him category. That's the core gameplay loops of Elden Ring. You follow the grace until you hit a wall with a boss that feels impossible. You go explore somewhere else to get stronger, and then return to try again. But in order to teach you the lesson, the games need some bosses that are way too strong, which goes against the idea of level scaling. And beyond that, level scaling could also make the game harder for struggling players. Picture this. You face Margit early on and it destroys you, so you decide to go exploring. You do most of Limgrave and decide to try Margit again. Things get better but not by much, and you still feel like there is no way you can win. So you decide to go exploring again, like the Weeping Peninsula for example. You spend 5 hours clearing caves, killing monsters, leveling up, getting stronger. Then you come back to Margit ready for revenge and you realize those 5 hours you spent killing monsters to get stronger? Well, he spent those at the gym and he got stronger too. Despite your level up, you don't feel stronger than before. Enemy strength scaling based on your character can be demoralizing for someone who struggles with the game. If the bosses get stronger when I get stronger, what's the point of getting stronger? That would make exploration less interesting and the game less accessible, because that wouldn't make the game harder only for the players who think the game is too easy, but also for those who find it hard enough as it is. That's why these are cursed solutions. They technically solve the problem of being too strong for the game, at the cost of breaking other fundamental parts of what makes Elden Ring so good. But those solutions being cursed does not mean every solution has to be cursed. What we need is a way for each player to choose its difficulty in a way that will not affect other players or make exploration less interesting or conflict with any core idea the game has. And that is already in the game. The solution is not for the game to change how strong the enemies are based on the player's strength. The solution is to let players change their strengths based on the strengths of the enemies. Put simply, if you feel like you're dealing too much damage, maybe you should change your weapon. When I say that, I know some people are going to roll their eyes, because I talk about my video topics with my wife, and when I told her that for me, the solution was to switch weapons when the game got too easy, she said, "That's crap, isn't it?" Well, she says that in French, but you get the idea. And I get it too. Asking players to limit themselves can sound like a dumb solution. But the thing is, a lot of players are already doing that. Tons of players play Elden Ring without using Spirit Ashes because they think it makes the game too easy. Some refuse to use magic, ranged weapons, or consumables. There are so many things that can make the game easier, and tons of players just choose not to use them, even on their first run. So really, how switching weapons when you're hitting bosses too hard any different than that? Right now, I'm fighting an early game boss I went back to after finishing the DLC. My character's level 122 and yeah, I hit really hard. But if I swap to an unupgraded weapon, suddenly the fight feels way more balanced. I actually almost got killed here. Which is kinda the point. It's a solution that works. And the cool thing is, beyond giving you control over how hard the game is, it also makes exploration better. There are so many weapons, armors, and rings to find, but it's easy to find one weapon you like and never try another one. I like having a varied build, with fast weapons, slow weapons, and a bit of magic, but even for me there is still like 3/4 of the loot I find who end up being useless. And when every dungeon gives you stuff you will never even consider using, exploration kinda loses its spark. But here is the thing, to find all this, you have to explore. And it's by exploring that you get overpowered. So switching to weaker weapon when you get too strong is a great way of trying out new stuff. And since there are a lot of different weapons for each weapon type, you don't even have to change your build if you don't want to. I mentioned Joseph Anderson and Neki Jeki at the start of the video, and it's not to call them out or start any kind of drama. I actually think their videos are great, and in Joseph's case, who isn't even named Joseph by the way, he's one of the people who inspired me to start making videos myself. The reason I wanted to bring him up here is because if there is one guy who should have thought about switching equipment, it's him. He already plays Elden Ring while banning himself from using a bunch of stuff, like consumables and summons. But also because in his Hollow Knight video, he talks about how after upgrading his nail, that's the name of the sword in Hollow Knight, it's a nail. Well, after upgrading the nail to the max level, he found the game too easy and wished he couldn't do the upgrade or adjust the nail's strength to make it weaker. What he was asking for in Hollow Knight is basically the solution he didn't recognize in Elden Ring. It's easy to notice an option when it's right there in the setting menu, but when it isn't, it's just as easy to miss it completely, or not even think of it as an option. Even if you are among the people most inclined to consider it an option. In my previous video, I conclude that players don't like feeling handheld in games, but that at the same time we do need a bit of handholding. We need developers to explain how the game works, because without that guidance we risk missing important things. Well, I think this whole difficulty issue is a perfect example of that. If I had to suggest something to fix that issue, I would have had an event early on where you get captured and thrown in prison. But instead of keeping your gear and escaping in 30 seconds, like what usually happens in Souls game, this time the prison will be a full dungeon and you'd start completely naked. You'd escape yourself, find a site of grace, and then have two passes to explore. One leading to a locked exit and the other one to a storage room where your equipment is kept, along with the key to the exit. While exploring, you'd find a new unupgraded weapon, like everyone we find in the game already, to fight guards and other prisoners. The idea would be to make the first part a bit tough with enemies designed to be challenging when you've got an unupgraded weapon, and then the second part where you get your equipment back and combat becomes far easier. So basically, the Dark Souls 1 prison sequence, except you would be naked at the start and the dungeon would not just be a staircase. I think that would be a really cool section. I've played games with sequences like that before and they were awesome. But more importantly, it would show players just how big the difference is between an upgraded weapon, even upgraded by just a few levels, and a completely non-upgraded one. Hopefully, that'd be enough to make people realize that this is actually a good way to tweak the game's difficulty. The goal of this video isn't to pretend that the game's difficulty is perfectly well balanced, because I don't think it is, and I'm not trying to present switching weapon as a perfect solution either, but it is a solution, and one that makes sense in a game like Elden Ring. I think it's important, when criticizing an element or a mechanic in a video game, to analyze it by taking into account how it interacts with the game's other elements and mechanics, as well as the developer's intentions. Because I think that leads to more honest and more interesting critiques. And if you want to criticize what I just say, feel free to do so in the comments. That is what they are there for. If you enjoyed the video, don't hesitate to subscribe and hit the bell. And until the next one, I hope you have a great day.